Morning students, Dr. Jimmy Henderson again, cognitive scientist and tutor. Today I'm going to be discussing steps of the research process, and mostly for my uni students, but those of other students and those of you interested in psychology or research would also benefit from this talk, which is not going to be too long. Okay, let's look at the steps in the research process. To place this in a practical context, it's possible that you've been working as a psychologist and that people will give you an issue to do research on, for instance, in a factory or business. They want you to research absenteeism. So there you will have your topic that you will be researching. It will be given to you. But in this case, these steps can also be used when you are doing your own research. In that case, when you are searching for your own topic or your own area of research. Okay. The way you would doing this is then you would do what we call a preliminary literature review, in which you would have a look at the area that you're studying and try to think of something that is interesting, a certain section that's very interesting for you in that area of research, something that's feasible, quite topical, and you think will make a difference in your field of study. It's important that you are excited about this project, so you must pick something that you find appealing in your area of study. So what you're looking for is an area which has been researched before, but there is something. It's not quite. There is possibly some issues that can be looked at, some new conclusions that you can come to, or maybe there's a gap in the knowledge somewhere, which you could then use as your point of research. In other words, you can use this document also if you are doing a master's or PhD dissertation, thesis. Right, so the first step is, as I said, do the preliminary literature review, and then establish what area you want to look at and what is your topic. The next step then, well, actually step one, is establish the context of your research. In other words, that you've got to now specify that area that you're working with. You can use an introduction, and in this step one, you have to then state the purpose of your research. You've got to show the background to the research. In other words, from your literature review, your preliminary literature review, you've got previous research in that field. There are other authors that have had a look at it, and you want to then place your research in the context of existing research. In other words, it has to relate to existing research in the field. You're just filling in gaps, or you elaborating on some aspect. I mean, in this case, psychology, but can be any area of study. Right. Also, in this step one introduction, you need to show the relevance of your topic. As I said, your topic you pick should be relevant and interesting and feasible. In other words, this is actually an area that you can do research on. It's not going to be on practical problems, ethical problems, access problems to sample of people, that you'll be able to do this in the field. Okay, so and also, as I said, then you're showing your relevance of this topic to your area of research. showing once again how it fits in with existing research and how relevant it is to that field. Step 2 therefore is your main literature review, in which you're now actually looking for your sources. You're looking for all the previous research that you can find in that area. List your sources, do your extracts from previous research for those that you're going to quote in your research, and then you need to make a list of these as your sources. Step 3 would then be establish your goals and objectives for the research. So you need to then clearly indicate in your report or your research what are you looking to achieve. In terms of an overall goal, you're trying to show how this fits in with that, or you're trying to show there's a correlation between this or correlation between that. And you then set a few objectives as well. In other words, my first objective will be to show the relationship between these two. My second objective will be then to explain why this happens and why this is important. Step 4. In other words, now after having done this preliminary work, you've come to the point where you formulate a research problem. You put in this problem that you've identified in a clear statement, like a title, the title of your dissertation or thesis. You put in it clearly, you're stating it clearly and concisely. In the case of qualitative research, which is when you're working with people in interviews, you're not doing so much statistical measurements. Becomes a research problem. In the case of quantitative studies, where you're working purely with numbers and statistics, showing how one group correlates with another group statistically, then you call it a hypothesis, which you would formulate. Step 5 is, having done this, you need to clearly then decide on your research method. What are you going to use? In the case of qualitative research, are you going to do interviews, in-depth interviews, questionnaires, and in the case of quantitative, where are you going to get the data? And what data are you going to be using from documents or from a field to establish your correlations? So you need to clearly explain your research method and the approach that you're going to use. In other words, I'm going to be going into the field and I'll be doing this and I'll be doing that, or I'll be working with documents and I'll be doing that, or I'll be looking purely at previous research and then explaining a certain aspect. Well, what is your approach going to be? Is it going to be practical field work, or is it going to be document review, that sort of thing? You need to then explain what you're going to be working with in terms of your sample, the measuring instruments you're going to be using. Are you going to use interview sheets, questionnaires? Are you going to use Likert scales for choice of questions? Are you going to use tables to record your data? And how you're going to record your data? You need to explain and understand and do all this before you actually do research. You also need to show the feasibility and correctness of your method. In other words, your method will have to conform to certain requirements like validity and accuracy. And is it feasible? As I said right at the beginning, it doesn't help picking a subject or an issue which is not going to be practical. In other words, how to examine all the students in all the universities in the country. It's not practical to do interviews with all the students in all the universities. You would rather pick a sample and say, no, my study involves this group of students at this university. It's more feasible and practical. Finally, you do your data analysis. You'll decide, once you've collected all the data and you've tabulated it or recorded it in recordings or notebooks or whatever, you then start to analyze it, and you use different methods of analysis. In qualitative analysis, you've got certain criteria you're going to apply, which I'm not going to go to in this point. And in quantitative, you've got statistical measurements, which you then apply, and correlations and things that you need to apply to your data to look for relationships and look for the correlations between them. Evaluation, which then once you've done the evaluation of the data, you come to certain conclusions. In other words, the data shows you this clearly or suggests that, and you then come to a number of conclusions. In qualitative research, it's more trends and relationships that you pointed out, or common factors, common trends, where in quantitative you can actually statistically show relationships between groups of people, groups of things, groups of numbers, and you can show the correlations then. And finally, you need to then show the contribution of your research to your subject area. You've done your research, or you're going to do your research, and this is what you hope to find, or this is what you have found in your research, and this is how it is going to improve the situation for the next batch of students, because you've now enlarged the knowledge relating to that subject, issue, or topic. So I want to thank you for those of you that have tuned in this morning, and hope that you've benefited from this. It's been a very short review of the steps in the research process, but it can also be applied, as I say, to the completion of a master's degree or a PhD thesis. So yes, I thank you for your time this morning, and good day.